All right, so first question we have, first subject for the night. Best current practices in team healthcare management. What sort of health concerns do athletes face? What are common injuries sustained by esports athletes? And feel anybody can jump in here. So, Corey, did you hear that?
Sure, yeah. So what I've noticed and what seems to be the most common are not necessarily injuries that are based on inflammation, although that seems to be the common thought. People are always worried about things like carpal tunnel, which can certainly happen, but that's not as common as some of the other injuries, which we would describe as mechanical. So mechanical injuries are in reference to movement patterns or body position. So basically, it's the way you move your hands, mostly because that's how most all the gamers play, but also how you carry your body, the posture and ergonomics. So there's the most common ailments are in overuse or in imbalance, uh, not necessarily overuse, but just overuse in an imbalance, or body position. So if you carry your body in forward leaning, you're going to have back pain or neck pain. If your arms are in bad position, if you're a keyboard player and you're not keeping your hands in the right place, you can experience wrist injuries. So the injuries are almost always mechanical. There are a few that are inflammatory in nature and other things like that. Primarily the mechanical injuries. Overuse strains, tendinoses is what we call them. Tendonitis is not really the right term for that. Tendonitis is if you have an acute injury, like picture somebody, a sprinter in a race, and they come up short holding their leg. That person would have acute tendonitis. The injuries that we experience as gamers are the repetitive strain, which tends to be an overuse imbalance, and those are tendinosis injuries. So there's no inflammation. You get the fiber orientation of the tendons is disoriented. It causes a lot of pain. And then other things like postural syndromes, anterior head carriage, that kind of thing leads to upper cross syndromes, which could lead to thoracic outlet. So there's a ton of things, but it all is based pretty heavily around mechanical factors, movement imbalance, overuse, and postural and ergonomic factors.
Thank you, Corey. Would anyone like to?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So Jason asked me when I got here if I had been studying up on my medical terms in preparation for the panel. Rest assured, I did not. So I probably am not going to be able to give you the type of technical analysis that you're going to get from him, but I can tell you what I saw last year managing the team. And so one thing that I kind of noticed about our players is that esports is really, really rigorous. People may not think of it that way, but especially for the life of a professional gamer, you're traveling. I mean, we are flying to New York City and back every single week, sometimes going to places like Las Vegas or Orlando or Dallas, and at a moment's notice, right? And then the other thing about gamers is that they tend to stay up really, really late at night. Maybe not all gamers, but definitely the ones I know. So, I mean, when you create a lifestyle that's sitting down, playing, leaning forward, maybe in some of the ways that he was talking about earlier, and then traveling constantly all the time, staying up late, not being on a regular sleep schedule, you start to develop some symptoms from that. And one thing I saw is that if a player had a pre-existing injury, so for example, we had one player that had a shoulder injury from playing basketball, it really exacerbated his shoulder injury to have to be going on planes constantly, to be sitting there 8 hours a day playing, and he started to have some numbness in his right arm throughout the season because he had a shoulder that wasn't completely healed, and the toll that playing all day and the airplanes and everything had on his body was preventing him from healing. So I think one, it can prevent pre-existing injuries from healing. Two, it's a really chaotic atmosphere that's not really conducive to promoting general wellness. And three, if you do start to have some of the issues like he was talking about with your posture or with your hands, it's not really easy to get the kind of care you need because you're living such a fast-paced lifestyle. And on the other hand, like what you're doing is going to only lead it to get worse. So that's kind of where I see it from where I stand. I don't know if anybody else has experienced things like
I
that.
definitely see that too, and I think what we're starting starting to see with where the industry is going is the bigger organizations, the bigger teams are starting to take it seriously because they're seeing player longevity is a really big issue as far as if they get injured, they could be 23 and their professional career is over. And if you've invested in that pro player, content creator, that's not good for your organization. So preventing these overuse injuries and setting good habits, because they're scrimming for 6, 10, 15 hours a day. Maybe they're practicing, maybe they're in like competitive scrims. So that's a lot of sitting, a lot of in the same position overuse. And so we're seeing the bigger organizations are starting to finally bring on trainers, nutritionists, psychologists, that's another big one, physical therapists, chiropractors, but there's no standard yet. And I think the more that we start to see pros are starting to talk about injuries that they're having, and then you'll see floods of people being like, oh my gosh, me too, how do I fix this, what did you do? It's an issue that's only going to get worse, and especially with the travel now, which is kind of newer in the esports world as far as, used to be they were landing at home or maybe local lands, but now people are actually, the bigger teams are having to travel to Europe, to China, to...
You guys are going soon, I think, right?
all over, or even domestically. That is incredibly exhausting. Like you said, late hours, nutrition is not always the best either. It's getting, but like the top teams, there is a big difference between how seriously those players take, like they will start working out, they will take the breaks, they'll take care of their hands, they start eating better, valuing sleep. I think it needs to start trickling down, and there needs to be more structure around it.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit from our team's perspective, and we're fortunate that we have our roster of players. They are all very health conscious personally.
Yeah.
Right? They all go to the gym every day. They typically go to the gym together before they scrim. They eat right. Like they want to take care of their bodies because they feel like it puts them in the best position to succeed. And we certainly, as an organization, encourage that. But one of the decisions that we made early on, before we had ever signed a single player, is that we were not going to require our players to stream at all outside of the designated scrim times. Right? As an organization, we don't take any revenue from streaming they do on their own time. We don't require it. They can choose to do it, right? And some of them do. But there's no incentive for the team to want them to do that. And that was important to us as we structured how we were going to look at things from an organizational standpoint. Now they do scrim 6-7 hours a day, right, as any team in our league and most other leagues do as well. So there's still a rigorous competitive preparation that goes into it. From our standpoint, we're a new organization. Our players just moved to Minnesota a few weeks ago. But the fact that we have them under one roof, they're there every day, that will help, right? We're on the same campus as the Vikings practice facility in a separate building. We're just in the process of moving into our new training facility. Actually, today was the day that all our staff moved from we were working out of a WeWork downtown. We had the players start scrimming in there last week. The week before in preparation for the event. So now that we have everybody under one roof, it makes those things a lot easier. And that's something we plan to spend a lot of time on in the future, is figuring out the right approach to make sure that for their own sake as well as the interests of the organization are aligned to keep these guys healthy and functioning at a high level.
And then you take us at like the other spectrum of that, and we have players all over the United States, even Canada, that are part of our organization. And so one scenario where a guy on our Apex team, he's 28 years old, lives out in New Jersey, and what I just learned, tendonosis. Is that what it is?
Corey?
Yep, so he got that. And I can't keep up on him because he's nowhere near us, obviously. And so he goes ahead, and he's supposed to take about a 2-3 week break, whatever the doctor told him. He goes ahead and plays about 10 hours a day. It doesn't break his habit at all. And he's going to continue to go ahead and keep hurting that. Even though it doesn't hurt anymore, it's going to continue to hurt long term eventually. And, it's harder from our perspective. We can't really keep our players up to that high standard that you guys might be able to look after your players for and provide those resources. And, the mentality for these amateur players and, top tier players that are trying to get to the top levels is, if something small like that happens, they need to keep going because they're trying to reach their goal. There's a lot of mental pressure on them, and they need to try to reach those standards. And so if this little thing in my wrist is going to, a little tweak in my wrist, that's not going to stop me from keep playing. And the comparison between esports and traditional sports is this is way more accessible. So they can do it all the time for even longer. And so it just makes it that much worse potentially.
That's a great point, because usually professional athletes on the traditional sports side, their body can only go so far before it gives out, and you have to rest or you have your training. But in this case, they can essentially stop scrimming and then keep playing
Yeah.
for 3 or 4 more
They
hours.
really want to, yeah,
Yep.
they can go forever.
Mhm.